might be bad. If it's bad, there's nothing we can do. There's just a problem on my end. So we're still streaming it just to see what happens. So I don't expect people to stay around too long. All right, you ready to go?
Yes.
All right, let's do this. Good, Bad, or Bullshit, episode 184. The 184th episode records in 5, 4, 3.
Good evening. Good day to you, and welcome to the Good, Bad, or Bullshit podcast, where we do random topics, then have an unrehearsed conversation about that topic, and then give it a quality review. I'm your sickly host, Mike Hodgins, along with fellow co-hosts, Mr. Bo Schwartz. Hello, Bo. How are you?
Hello, Michael. Hello, Good, Bad, or Bullshit listeners. I'm good. Ready to do a show.
He's good. His verdict on himself is good.
Yeah.
And Crofton, how are you this day?
I would say my verdict on myself is bullshit. No, it's bullshit for sure. My legs hurt. I'm feeling old, and my wife's sick, and yeah, bullshit. And it's winter.
You mentioned that she had some stomach issue.
Yeah. No, I mean those
the
are
pukes
the worst.
is what I would guess.
Yeah, it's. I won't go into her personal situation, but I will say that I had something similar about a month ago, and it's going around, and it's part of, like, I think, when people complain about winter and all this, you think about normal stuff like snow and giant, cold and all this stuff that people generally complain about, but also like sickness is one of those big things because we're inside. So I forget about that, but that really does suck. We've been unlucky.
It does. I just came through I'm on the tail end of a pretty bad cold. I have had a few colds this year. I blame my toddler, those little cesspool of germs that they are. But this latest cold was like, I was like, oh, okay, those other ones were just little warm-ups. This was the real deal. I was like 4 days in bed, like, and I have this like pharmaceutical hangover, where you just like, it's like you can taste the decongestant and like Tylenol, Advil, pharmaceutical mix, just like it's on your breath. It's disgusting.
Or as Bo calls it, Tuesdays.
I don't take a lot of pills though.
But I was saying to myself, at least I didn't have stomach flu, because there was some nausea but no vomiting, and I'm like, that's when it gets to that level too. That's the real deal. Anyways, Bo, you're holding out, not been ill. I hope you.
It's coming. I've had tickly throat.
Oh.
Yeah,
I'm gonna leave that one alone. Too low hanging fruit.
Yeah. Thank you, Crofton. I do appreciate it. I mean, I do like to hear your funny jokes, though. So I mean, if you were so inclined, I'd say have at her. But
let's keep moving on.
I've got a tickly throat, and it's caused some coughs last night when we were playing some Heroes of the Storm. But today it's kind of there. I don't know. I feel like there's a ticking time bomb somewhere in me, and it's waiting to go off.
You might be lucky, because I had a few of those, like, where I was like, oh, I feel the throat, it's gonna come, and then it kind of just fizzled or turned into a super minor cold. But this latest one, it was like fire in my throat, and every time I swallowed, it was like someone was cutting my throat.
Just in time for Valentine's.
I like how Crofton's so deep in the gutter right now, he just can't contain himself.
I'm sorry.
All this talk about throats and warm sensations in them.
It feels like...
Sometimes we have interesting conversations on this show, and then sometimes not.
It just feels like Mike was pushing it further and further to the point where he knew that I was
just simply describing some symptoms.
He knew I would be able to keep it in. Okay, jeez. Speaking of hacking and coughing, that's a segue.
Yeah, I'm already halfway there, so we may as well just get the random topic generator going.
Right, so we don't want to talk about all the big news of the day? No?
No.
All right, we just want to get straight to work this week and entertain listeners. All right, Mike, well, we're just waiting on you. Are you ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, well, have at her.
Normally I feel like he fakes those, but it sounded real.
It's true. He put in a good performance this week. That's what I would say if it was pretend.
Okay, Hodgins, would you stop doing this? You know I hate it when you do this.
I know you do, but I feel like I give
the
the
topic
purpose.
and you're like, oh my God,
I
I
would just
don't know
say
about this
with Donald Trump in the White House, it seems apropos. The topic is ignorance.
Well, we know where you stand on the president of the United States.
He's a deeply ignorant man. I mean, I don't. Is this an uncommon?
I'm with you. Well, actually, this is okay. We're going to talk about ignorance in a second, but this is a good place for me to do some backpedaling because we did a show all about Donald Trump that didn't come out of the random topic generator. We were so moved by this world event that we just felt like talking about it for an hour. And I believe I said something along the lines of, "Hey guys, let's give this guy a chance." I'm pretty sure that's what I said. I take it back. If I could take it, I take it back so much.
Well, we have given him a chance. It's been 2 weeks. He's proven himself an incompetent fool. I'm like, okay, can we move on? Can he be impeached already?
But see, what's interesting to me about this topic was that when we fuel up the random topic generator, just dump a bunch of random topics in it. I remember seeing this one fall in and thinking to myself, this will be interesting. And what do the expression "ignorance is bliss," right?
Yeah.
And the idea of like maybe if I was less informed on things, I would be perhaps happier in this. And it made me think positively about. I briefly thought positively about the concept of ignorance and the idea of not being as informed of, especially world events and that. And now the American White House has a president that, by all accounts, is very ignorant. And to be clear, like ignorance is the word in saying somebody is ignorant is so full of negative connotations, seen as a pejorative, but really,
I mean, it can be used as that, or it can be just descriptive.
I know it can be used to that way, but it's reached now the point where it pretty much can't not be used that way. Like even though I understand its original meaning in somebody lacks knowledge, or you could say, oh, I'm ignorant of this, please tell me more. People generally don't say that anymore because the negative connotation has overtaken it so much. Anyway, all this to say, when the topic went in, I was thinking positively, I guess, about it. But now we have a president in the White House who is by all accounts ignorant on a lot of files, issues, processes, and these sort of things, ways of acting like a human, and it makes me, it's made me turn a lot more to say, like, no, ignorance can be a profoundly dangerous thing as well, depending on who the person in question is.
Yeah, for sure, depending on your position. Absolutely. It often, like, I like to start from a point with this of kind of acknowledging that we're all deeply ignorant at some level or about some things. It's impossible to know everything, and like what Socrates said, something like, the only thing I know is that I know nothing, or something like that. This is a smart person, but it's a fact that, like, I oftentimes think, like, I'm like, the true nature of reality, I'm ignorant of what that is. We see things through a lens of being a human being, having this type of animal brain and this type of, like, we don't really know what the universe is like. We're ignorant of so many things, but bringing it back to the level that you're talking about, Crofton, because I agree, there are, like, levels, right? And it's like, yeah, I'm like, I can be ignorant about the true nature of the universe or what absolute truth is or whatever, but understand, facts that we have sort of proven scientifically or that type of thing, and rather than just spouting off what I think. So there are levels of ignorance. We're all ignorant about some things, or in a lot of ways, but it can be, there's dangerous ignorance, and then there's just like, you just don't know something, and that's not bad, right? It's not bad to not know something. We all start off not knowing everything. It's not bad in and of itself.
I have a question for Bo.
Okay.
Just because, and this is not to put you on the spot, Bo, but of the three of us, we know that you are the one that is generally least following, say, world events, politics, the news, that sort of thing. I don't think it's history. I don't think it's unfair to say those things.
I think Bo's relatively well informed, actually, but yeah.
But I mean, like he on a day-to-day basis, like he's well informed about sort of general principles and things, but like in terms of day-to-day current events, what's going on.
No, I mean, okay, let's. Yeah, I have a reputation on the show to not know what the hell is going on when you guys are talking about some relevant, impactful issue to Canadian citizens or the world over. I'm usually like, huh, and then I'm like, I don't care.
But my question to you is, do you think that makes you a happier person?
No. I don't think that.
Well, are you
from a happiness perspective? I think knowledge is power, ironically enough. I just feel like if I don't feel like it's a direct impact to me, and oftentimes maybe that's a misestimation, at least I think from what you guys have said sometimes about stuff I care about. Like, who cares about? So what if Justin Trudeau isn't going to go through with the proportional voting? It's all just a big sham anyways. I've heard all I need to hear about it. I don't know if it's a happiness thing and more of a... There's only so much you can focus on in a day and with your life. And we all choose those things that we have value for. If that makes sense? And there's so much content to consume. I would say...
I think about like all the Trump news, right? Like it's just like non-stop Trump news, craziness. He does all sorts of stuff, whatever. And I read about his like cabinet picks and I read about all these sort of people, and I get anxious and I get like, oh God, I can't believe, the world that we're living in, like the Environmental Protection Agency. It's going to be somebody who hates climate change. It's got to, all this stuff, and it gets me all riled up. But here's the reality: is that I live in Canada. I don't even like. It can affect me sort of from an ancillary basis a little bit because we're close by. But really, if I didn't read these stories, if I was ignorant of all of American politics and American news, all I knew was this guy is the president. Maybe my only exposure to him is when he comes to Canada or when he's on the newscast by Prime Minister. Would I be happier right now than I am, where every day I wake up and I'm like, oh God, Trump's still president. What's he done today? Sorry.
I think yes. You and I've thought about this before too, being someone who kind of like groans over the state of the world all the time, and I just like to again point out, like, being ignorant is not being dumb, or being not intelligent. You can be a very intelligent person and just not know some things, and that's not necessarily fault. I think it's a fault when you espouse opinions about things that you don't know anything about. That's maybe a fault, and one which Donald Trump possesses. But like, I was making a joke the other day, I think related to this, of like, I should just sell my houses and move to like the woods. And it's like, but honestly, like, if I did that, like if I went and was like, moved to the middle of nowhere, lived a very simple life, say I had enough money, I have a little piece of land, and I could have enough food, and I just sort of, lived in the woods, things like, I could probably live a very happy life being ignorant of the fact that like the climate is changing. Like I might notice some weather events are different, but like I wouldn't be that aware of its global impacts. Like if you were just ignorant of so many world facts, you could kind of go about your life. And even if you just chose to be ignorant of them, because like, I think about climate change and stuff like that and being like, oh man, like, could be like, they talk about by 2100, we could have catastrophic climate change. Where it's like mass desertification, crop failure. You're like, oh God. But I'm like, I'll be dead.
The worst kind.
Yeah.
It's the worst kind of
climate change. I'm like, but I'll be dead by then anyways. And honestly, like, if I just didn't pay attention to this type of stuff, like, and just lived a kind of hedonistic life where just like, what do I want to do? And just focused on that and just did not pay attention to any of these things, I think you would be happier. But I think that it also comes back to that kind of balance between happiness and like Do you care about the world, or is there meaning about how things are? Does that mean something to you? And that's a balance, I think. We talked about that with having children, right? You have children, you're like, well, I'm less happy now that I haven't had a kid, but I'm like, my life's more meaningful. And I think the same is kind of true of ignorant. Like, you can be happier not knowing things, but you might, like, I like to know how the cogs turn as much as I can, even though, or like this, or like, that expression, how the sausage is made, where you're like, you don't want to know how the sausage is made. I'm like, I do, even when it grosses me out and makes me sad. I want to know what's going on, but it definitely does not make you happy, and there's something to be said for that.
Well,
but
if I can interject, I have a more commonplace example. It's kind of like some days you leave the house and you're not sure you locked your front door, and there's some days where you don't lock your front door and you don't even think about it. And you get home and you're like, oh crap. Well, that was dumb, but the days where you weren't sure are the way more anxiety-ridden days because you need to know something and you're aware that you're ignorant of a thing. Like, there's more anxiety in the sense that knowing that there's uncertainty about your door being unlocked, or just knowing for sure and having to be pulled away. Remember, Michael, we went to a bachelor party in Montreal a long time ago? Was it for Crofton's? I think so. And we were driving out. All of us were there. We were driving out to Montreal, and like 30 minutes on the drive to Montreal, I made your brother turn around to go back to my apartment so I could make sure the door was locked. You don't remember that?
No, but that sounds. I'm annoyed at the concept, so I'm sure I would annoyed then too.
So that caused me a great deal of anxiety. If I hadn't thought about it the whole weekend, though, maybe it was locked. It was definitely locked. We turned around for nothing.
It was. I remember.
But if I just hadn't have even entered my brain, the ignorance aspect of just not even knowing what I didn't know, I would have been much more carefree. I might not have been thrilled if it was unlocked, but
it's kind of interesting when you get into this with sort of specifics like that, and then you think about things like, I was thinking of this example. It's like, say you're married or something, and your one partner's cheating on the other one, right? But they do it in such a way that so you try to say your wife's cheating on you, but you don't know, right? And she's a good partner, does everything well. You have no reason to be suspicious.
But she's
it's not affecting your relationship, and you go your whole life like that. Okay, now just imagine. I'm just saying this. Okay, This is a scenario, right? Now we're talking about this. We know, and I think most people are like, oh, I'm being wronged. I want to know, right? But if you didn't know and you didn't suspect, and you were happy, and she never told you, and it was never any big issue, you might live, because what's the alternative? You blow up, you get divorced, your children are raised in a broken home, maybe you have trouble moving on with your life. It's kind of like, is being ignorant of that fact, is it better? And again, we know the truth in this scenario, so it's hard to not be like, no, I want to know. But there's other examples like that. Say you're a child who's adopted, right? And it used to be the thing where you never told your kid that they were adopted, like back in the day. It'd be like, no, you're our kid. That's it. It's just a secret no one ever.
You just happen to be black, and I happen to be white.
Unless it's very obvious. But nowadays, of course, it's like a right. Like you kind of have to tell kids that they have biological parents elsewhere, and that may be a source of. It's at least
that's
a source
what I wanted
of
to unpack with the first example you gave, because it's
yeah. Well, go ahead. I mean, these are just scenarios. I don't know what's the right answer. Because in the
second scenario, you're saying now what you should be doing, or what is considered right, is to tell. But also, I would say, like, the problem with that is not the cheating in the other one. The problem is you think you have an honest relationship, and you don't. Like, you know what I mean? So, like, would you be happier not knowing? Like, I guess if you never enters your mind, like, your door being unlocked, I guess you wouldn't know the difference. But it still makes you a dick. Yeah, you wouldn't
know the difference.
It still makes you a dick. It's like those husbands who have two families that never meet or whatever in different cities.
Like, we know that they're assholes, but it's like, again, it's again coming back to the ignorance of something. And it's like, I mean, these are, I'm sure we could find scenarios that are skewed more positive, because these ones seem negative.
Well, so let's take the Matrix example too, right? So you've got the red pill, blue pill. So spoilers for a movie from 1999, but the idea is that one character in particular later in the film knows very much what the reality is and chooses ignorance, because the idea is that there's a real world and there's a fantasy world, and for all intents and purposes the fantasy world is a much nicer place to live, and the main character earlier on the film gets the choice between learning the truth or living comfortably in the fantasy world. And of course his curiosity gets the better of him, which to a certain extent it's an escape from ignorance. He has a curious mindset. He has an appetite for knowledge, and that leads to him to taking that path. But later in the film, as I mentioned earlier, another character who's fully aware of both the fantasy world and the reality, gets, essentially chooses to be brainwashed so that he can go back to the fantasy. He wants to become ignorant, and I think of that fantastical scenario when you have these two worlds. And Mike's example of the couple, if you knew, for instance, that I find out my wife is cheating, and then we break up, and I never meet anyone again, and I die alone and unhappy, and she gets full custody of the children. And so I have all this.
Seems like a win for you, but okay.
I have all this this full knowledge of what it, on the other hand, the alternative is that I just get lied to, and I don't know it, and I just enjoy the life that I have. And it does become tricky. It does become when is ignorance appropriate, and when is not, when is knowledge appropriate. And I sort of have a question for you guys on that, and it was one that I thought of earlier when you were talking, and Mike was talking about living in the woods, and how you could almost live a more selfish life in ignorance. My question is, like, we talked about voting on this show before, and the responsibilities associated with voting, and if there should be like a test for voting, and if only informed people who are informed on the issues should have the right to vote. And so I guess my question would be, do you guys think that there's a civic responsibility to not be ignorant, especially on issues that are affecting the collective?
If you're in public office or public
No,
service?
as a citizen, like, should you have an inherent responsibility to be at least moderately informed on the biggest issues affecting the public?
I think yes, and I think that you do. I just think it's problematic to enforce.
Well, I mean, I think it's an absolute necessity, especially in something like a democracy. But the thing is, as Bo said, you can't enforce it, and also, like, you can't. The thing about ignorance is that you have to care about learning something, and you can't make someone care about something they don't care about. So some people don't care about politics. They don't vote. They don't care. And in some ways, those people, I have been like, oh, if only I was like that person, and I just did not give a shit about what's going on. Because honestly, sometimes they do seem happier. They're just like, whatever, I'm going fishing this weekend. I'm like, oh, it's like they're never annoyed about things that are world events because they just don't care. But I do think that the civic responsibility one is an interesting angle, because when you have the power invested in the people, but you're totally free to be a complete idiot, or not possess critical thought, so you can be easily manipulated by someone, or a movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's dangerous. It's highly dangerous. But you can't make people be not ignorant if they don't want to be.
Yeah.
Like if people don't, you can't make someone care. That's the trick. It's hard.
Well, the other component of it is that it's not that they don't even want to care, it's that they don't even want to listen to it in the first place. Like, when you think about when you're calling somebody ignorant, because I think a lot of what we talked about is sort of, there's a sense that someone's lying to you or denying you the information, whereas you can self-deny the information. And it isn't a question of apathy, which is what you're driving at, right? Like, oh, there's important stuff going on in the world. Do you know what's happening in the House of Commons? And I go, nope. And, just it doesn't enrage me. It doesn't affect me. But if you guys happen to have a conversation about it and I pick up some information, I'm okay with that. But there's this sort of active defensive mechanism where as soon as something that upsets a person's, like, ideological stance, not outwardly, but even inwardly and within people they know, that they refute it, right? Or they don't want to hear it, or they don't have time. Like, it's less like, for me, it's apathy and laziness. Like, I think knowledge is great, and whenever I don't know something, I do kind of feel bad, and I feel like I should take the time to know more, and it's important. I feel like it's a different thing altogether to be very proactively narrow, like your scope of view is narrow. So when something different comes along, you don't have time for it, or it's not important, or do you know what I mean? Like when you don't want to listen to reason. Does that make sense? When you don't want to hear, I think of religion. It's like, we don't want to hear what you have to say. Like, so many times, people of more religious bent have just been very dismissive in my younger days about my points of view, and that seems
that's a
bad.
Good point, Bo. The different types of ignorance, because there's ignorance that's just like Mike gave the example of, like, he's ignorant of the creation of man or the universe. I don't know, like these greater truths that nobody knows. And then there's selected ignorance, like you're choosing to be ignorant on something, or to deny facts and information that are presented to you in lieu of seeking comfort in ignorance. And then as well, like, you get people, and you see this on internet forums all the time, where people either latch on to different facts or different figures, and you definitely see this with Trump and his fake news concept, to say, like, oh, you are super ignorant. Oh, I can't believe how ignorant you are right now. Oh, you're buying all Clinton's promises. You're really ignorant. Oh, you think Trump is going to do all the stuff he says? I can't believe the level of ignorance that you're showing right now. And so it's people who are, so you've got of those three types that I presented, you've got the using ignorant on, like, you can't know everything, so you're ignorant of some things. Then there's chosen ignorance, and then there's, like, almost like, I guess, when you align yourself with a political party or a group and the facts that they're presenting, and do not, like, I don't know, it's sort of like a mix of those two models.
Well, willful ignorance is a term I've certainly heard bandied around before, and I think there is something to that, where someone you hold an ideological view. It's like confirmation bias, right? And everyone's guilty of this to some extent, where you believe a certain thing and you seek out facts that reinforce what you already believe, instead of trying to have an open mind or be self-critical. It's hard to be self-critical. And I mean, humans are kind of built that way. We defend the things that we believe in. And you have to break that down. You have to have a process, and that's arguably like the scientific process of, like, test, what does evidence tell you, blah, blah, blah. But like, again, on these levels, I was thinking about this the other day, the kind of, like, ignorance and we're sort of where we are as a species. And I heard some guy, I can't remember the details, but basically saying that, like, we've been in a period where most, like, reasonably intelligent people could understand most everything there is to understand, right? Like, in, say, the 19th century or 20th century or whatever, you can understand how a motor vehicle works, like when I see a diagram of it and I'm understanding internal combustion engine, I'm like, okay, yeah, like, I'm not an engineer, but, like, I get it, and you can be explaining these things and get it more and more. But then there was a huge period of human civilization where people didn't understand anything, right? They didn't know how the earth was round. They didn't know, we were just all ignorant of everything. So now we've moved into a period of knowledge. We know stuff. But he was also saying, and I think this is true, we're about to move into a new period of ignorance again. Because I think of something like computer programming, man. I don't understand it, right? Like, I don't really understand how a computer works. Like, I know it's like on-off switches, and there's, like, processor with a billion freaking, like, on off. I'm like, I don't know how this stuff works, right? And it's the basis of everything that's new. And when they talk about things like these massively complex algorithms that people who design them barely know how they work now, and then getting into the idea of algorithms designing algorithms, that we're going to move into a phase. I keep thinking of that movie, Idiocracy. It's becoming more and more true all the time. That's an awesome movie. But, like, yeah, I'm like, are we gonna? Because how can you know all that stuff, right? Like, coming back, it's like And this is the kind of the ignorance which I think is forgivable. Like, it's impossible to know everything, but I also feel like vulnerable when I don't know how something works. Like when I think of computers or software, I'm like, it kind of irks me. And I once tried to learn like web programming. I'm like, my brain doesn't like it.
This is why, though, that I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is why I think it would be really cool if, like, computers are great. Like, all that stuff you talk about, I geek out, and my brain goes like, oh, it's so cool, algorithms, teaching other algorithms and AI learning. But I really feel like the human brain is like the biggest quintessential piece to like all this. If there's some way we could make that better, like if I could just take my brain and give me one that's supplanted by mechanical enhancements that make it operate better, so that I can know more things and study more concurrently and be like Data from Star Trek. Isn't Data the ultimate role model? I mean, I know you love Data, and not because of his anthropomorphic robot with a soul kind of deal, but the things he can do is really cool. Like, robots generally, like, they punch really hard and stuff like that, but what's cool is he could read super fast. That was always the coolest thing he could do. He could absorb information quickly and make determinations quickly. So, and that's to combat ignorance. Like, it's an improvement on, we're all affected by ignorance to some capacity, and it hampers us when there's so much to know.
It's funny because you guys are both talking about things that you're interested in, or that Bo, you're just saying you want to learn more, you want to have that capacity, like Data and Mike was talking about, how he knows how the cars work, but the computers are sort of a mystery. And it makes me realize that I asked you a question earlier, Bo, about say, staying up to date with current events, but I actually don't have as, I guess, ravenous an appetite to or curiosity to really wonder how all this stuff works. Like, I'm going to get to a point where Gwen's going to ask me a lot of questions. I will literally be on my phone going to Wikipedia, being like, okay, I'll tell you how this works in a second. There's some stuff I know for sure, but Mike is a guy I associate with always trying to learn about as much as possible. Whereas for me, for a lot of things, I'm like, I don't really care. Like, I don't care how they made my iPhone super small. It's sweet now that it's this small. Maybe they'll make it smaller, but like it is a kind of a feeling of like, this is beyond me, but it exists, so I'm happy. I'm happy to use it. I'd be the most useless person to be sent back in time. Like they send me back in time and they'd be like, I'd be in the medieval period or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, you're from the future. Tell us how to make all the stuff that you get to enjoy so much of. And I'd be like, oh, geez. Yeah.
Did you watch John Oliver last night? And they'd be like, no.
And you can write a good some sort of written document. You'll enchant them with your mastery of the language. You're a great writer.
I would just talk. I'd be like, oh man, the future's so crazy. We have like these machines in the palm of our hand that can do a zillion things. We drive these giant automobiles. They're like, really? Oh, you need to show us how to do these things. And I'd be like, I'm sorry. But the point I was trying to make is I have no real interest in the workings of these things. So it's not being like I'm ignorant to a lot of these things that I use on a daily basis. And that's one thing that is kind of funny when you think about all the people who can drive. For instance, Mike mentioned cars. How many of them could necessarily fix their car, or maybe even know how it completely works? Like, they take them to the mechanics or whatever, but they're ignorant to a tool that they use every day, and there's a lot of those that we are, and it's not really the end of the world. It's just
yeah. And I mean, on this line of, I mean, to bring it back to more what we were talking about at the start, because I find this an interesting thing to be like, you just can't know this stuff, and it is frightening to me as technology becomes too difficult for us to understand. The implications of that are worrisome. But back to stuff like, in the Donald Trump era, and it's kind of like, when it's around things like the kind of, because those are things we maybe can't control really. Like, technology is going to progress, but things like decision making or people who seek elected office being ignorant of what should be basic things is a much more, at the moment present concern and dangerous one than is the like, oh, we won't be able to understand technology soon. Like, wow, who knows what that'll be like, but it's like we might have a nuclear war soon because of one ignorant person who's in power. So it's just like, again, to bring it back to like the levels at which we can control it, things like, oh, do you just go with your gut all the time, or should you read stuff and learn about the world and then make your decisions, because a lot of people have this view, like the Donald Trump view of like, I don't need all that fancy learning, I know what's right and what's not right. And it's like, you might feel that, but you might be wrong. And if you can't acknowledge that, that's a problem, especially if you want to lead the world or lead a group of people. That's dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. Man, it's such a weird topic because it's like it's basically about what people don't know, and there's a lot of reasons why like people won't know things. It's incidental. It's through subterfuge. It's on purpose from the source. Like,
but there is one thing that, and Mike just sort of touched on, bringing it back to Trump, and not about him specifically, but I think a lot of supporters and stuff. There is a large anti-intellectualism movement in the past few years in particular, and a celebration of ignorance, and a rejection of those who possess knowledge, experts in fields, and the joke often is like, you go to a medical doctor when you have a medical emergency, but like when it comes to politics or whatever, oh, I want some Joe who tells it to me like it is, not somebody who is well versed in the policy and the issues. And I think that celebration of ignorance, like, it's okay to be ignorant of things, but the celebration of it as something that should be lauded, and that, like, and recognized, and I'm not saying ignorance should be shamed, like, but it's not a positive thing. Like, you shouldn't be striving for it, and it shouldn't be celebrated.
The language around it, I think, when a lot of people who are considered ignorant, isn't that we're happily ignorant. It's that we belong to an ethos that has beliefs in certain things, right? Like, it's, and
well,
it's
I mean,
that's where you close yourself off to being receptive to things that ruin the biases that Mike talked about earlier, right?
But it's also difficult because, I mean, the elephant in the room in this conversation is organized religion, right? Where it's like some basic willful ignorance is necessary for a lot of it to function, and that's frightening thought. There's a lot of progressive religious people who kind of like embrace the knowledge that science has given us and find room for in that areas where, how do quarks stick together and what caused the Big Bang, where they can find the, like, the mystery of God, and that's where they focus their interest. But there's other people who think the Bible's literal truth, and that is absolute willful ignorance, especially when presented with something like much more plausible explanations that can be backed up by evidence. So we have billions of people like the whole conversation now is like, there's a real problem with, say, Islamophobia right now, and that is a problem. But it's also like, to me, it's also a problem that any organized religion kind of espouses, that you must have a certain level of willful ignorance if you're going to accept the religion fully, and that's dangerous. And it's hard, and it's becoming hard to talk about that too, because you want to respect people's rights to be ignorant, because frankly, that is your right. If you want to be ignorant, you can be. Again, it can be dangerous.
Isn't it though? Like, sometimes when you make that argument, don't you feel a little bit like you're letting people have it both ways and not taking a stance? Because I agree with you. Like, I personally, there are all kinds of different cultural backgrounds and religious backgrounds and things that make people different, that divide us, that really shouldn't. And we should be able to talk about our differences, understand one another, not be ignorant about them, and coexist. But there are things about other cultures, other religions, that at a certain point, if you don't stand for anything, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. Like, I think there's some truth in that, because at a certain point, I've read the Quran. There's stuff in there that gets me fucking mad. And I'm like, how can anybody believe in that? And it makes me, when I hear some, on one hand I'm like, I want to respect your religion, but at the same time, you believe in a thing that I find actually barbaric, right?
Well,
I
and the
feel
Bible
like
too. The Bible is full.
I'm
You
not.
know, let's
I'm
not just
picking
say
on
it's a con.
Islam, but you're right. I'm an atheist, so yes, throw them. Like there's a lot of stuff. I'm just. Again, we're talking that we don't want to single out Islam potentially because of we live in a time of cultural sensitivity, and if someone is culturally insensitive, they're called ignorant. But I think you can be culturally sensitive. Can you be culturally sensitive and say, upon analysis of the facts, I think the things you believe in are barbaric, and I would actually like to see that stopped, or don't want that out there. Like, and that I would say that's true of Christianity, as I think celibacy is the dumbest fucking concept ever invented for religious order. I don't see a point or a purpose to that arbitrary rule.
Well, let's not get too hung up on the details there.
But I'm no, but okay, fine. But what I'm saying is that they're born out of ignorance. Like I think there is a way that we can come to know whether celibacy is effective through statistical analysis research. Is there any way to really settle that argument? Are we always just going to be ignorant if that has any value? But if we do arrive to a point where we know better, then what they're doing is wrong, and it should be stopped for the betterment of a community. I think there's a point where that's true.
To take maybe a different example on that, because I mean it is tricky to shit on religions because people believe this stuff. But something like racism is another example where it's like if you're a racist, you kind of have to be ignorant to like how biology works, DNA,
sure.
How it's all built, and to be like we're all the fucking same, and it's like you have to have a narrative in your head which contradicts. Like if you just studied like, you'd realize we're all just kind of meat bags made up of the same stuff, and once you know a little bit more, you have to kind of drop racism as an actual thing. But yet people hold on to it, and they hold on, and like ignorance breeds that kind of thinking, and it's scary.
It's weird because I'm like, for me, I'm like, it's not okay to be racist. I'm like, it's kind of okay to be prejudiced if you're an atheist, and that's extremely biased. But I'm as I get older, I realize that like by being an atheist and not taking a stand is really like,
well, no, I mean that's the people like Bill Maher and Sam Harris and the new atheists who've taken that hard line. We talked about this on a whole other episode. I don't want to get too back into it. I just mean it's an elephant in the room in the sense that like talking about ignorance and willful ignorance. I think we were kind of getting at there's the whole ignorance that you can't know everything. That's fine, we can't. But then the kinds of stuff like you can know stuff, but then you have like thinking about world religions. I'm like, you have billions of people being conditioned to be willfully ignorant of things they could know. And I mean, oftentimes you hear this stories where some people, find their way kind of to at least secular thinking just because they hear enough stuff where they're like, they put two and two together and say that this stuff doesn't make sense anymore. But yeah, and then again, I'm like, well, the people who just have that cultural and the religious stuff, like, are they just happier, because they have this binding force of religion that maybe an atheist doesn't have?
I don't know. I think nobody's happier on either side because I think, I don't know. We're getting the verdicts because I think we're starting to run long on the show, but
this one's a mess.
As a fan of it doesn't have to be perfect. As a fan of Downton Abbey, so I started watching the show. I know you're a huge fan of the show, and there's like
it's the best
second episode where like Maggie Smith's character she runs the hospital, and there's I guess the new cousin who they're trying to suit up with the eldest daughter to marry off. Anyways, watch the show if you want the whole story. But there's this rivalry between his mother and Maggie Smith, the other mother, and Maggie Smith runs the hospital, but this other mother was a nurse in the war, and there's this guy dying of some disease. And Maggie Smith's just like, well, let's just let him pass away. And he's like, no, if we do this thing and, cut off this part of his heart and put him with adrenaline, we can save his life. And Maggie Smith's kind of like, no. The doctor knows what he's doing. You were a nurse. And long story short, the narrative is she had something of value to offer. The doctor liked it, but Maggie Smith didn't want her meddling because there's a personal rivalry and would have preferred ignorance to saving a man's life. And the story had a happy ending. They did the procedure. Maggie Smith was humbled, but of course handled it like, oh, well, without too much dignity. And the point of that story is exactly what you're talking about. It's like ignorance has willful ignorance is dangerous to other people. Like if you can be better and by knowing something, always be the thing that knows the thing. I think you might feel happier, but do you really feel happy fucking other people over by lying to them or by not doing everything you could to save them? I think the answer is no. You have a short time on this earth. You are going to be happier making a difference in people's lives versus just sitting around being like, I don't give a shit about anything. That's sort of my take. And that's kind of a verdict, I guess.
Let's move into
all right, so let's get the verdict, the animals in here. Everyone ready for the animals in the chat room? Kind of getting busy in there. Here we go.
Order, I say. Order in the court.
Order in the court. I'm just going to keep going and make mine short because it's basically giving one. Ignorance is always dumb. That's why it's called ignorance. Anything that can be solved by being not ignorant makes the situation better. It may sober you a bit. It may make you a little more depressed to learn about the depravity of humankind or the vast infintessence of space that you'll never get to see. It may make you feel like you know too much and have seen too much. But the alternative is always lying to people, screwing them over, screwing yourself. And we call that ignorance. And it's always bad. And it's the real villain that always needs to be defeated, not Darth Vader. So, on that note, I'm going to say that ignorance is very bad. Very bad, Jerry. You're very bad. All right.
I feel like I knew the way this one was going to go. Ignorance. So I feel like I'm super biased about this in the sense that I'm like, yeah, I think ignorance is bad. I'll just get it right out of the way right now. But I'm a lover of learning, right? And a lot of people are, even whether it's niche or broadly, it doesn't matter. A lot of people like learning. I really like learning new things. I feel like that's what life's all about. Just keep learning until you can learn no more. But even like all aspects of ignorance, I do think are bad. Like, I mean, like the willful stuff really bothers me when it's our leaders making decisions based on ideology instead of knowledge or facts or greater good. It always bothers me. And when it's stuff like, oh, I can't understand the true nature of the universe because I have to look through it through the lens of being a human being. Being ignorant of that also bugs me. I'm like, I want to know what is it really like, and not knowing how computer works. I'm like, I feel like I should know that. I can't know it all, and I feel like that's back to that Socrates quote. But I feel like all you can do is strive to know as much as you can know, and that's attainable for anyone. Like, know as much as you can. Don't not know something because you don't care. And I mean, I guess, and that's the trick, is like you can't make people care. And if someone does want to learn something, they're not going to learn it. Doesn't matter what you do. But anyways, and I just really feel like that's a sad state when that is the case for a lot of people. So, but I really do think ignorance is bad, and fighting against it is good. So, right. Yeah, but I'm super biased. Crofton, last word.
Yeah, so I find that ignorance is one of those things that's taken a bad rap for many years, and now we've reaped the consequences, which is that people who are ignorant of a lot of things, that book learning, if you will, have been made to feel bad by society for being ignorant. And I know, like, on a micro level, if I go in and I speak to my boss and he asks me for information about something, like a file that I'm working on, and I don't know that off the top of my head, or I'm ignorant to the response to his question, and I feel like, I should know this. Well, I feel bad. I feel bad about myself, feel badly for being ignorant. And I think for a long time, a big swath of people have felt bad, and that has a lot to do with other topics we've talked about on the show, including the education system. including religion and racism. These are all things that are very much tied into ignorance. And the whole ignorance is bliss thing that we talked about early, I think on a very micro selfish level, I can empathize with that idea. But I think in terms of what we have as sort of a civic duty to have a well-functioning society that is constantly moving forward and developing on and above itself, the best way to do that is by having an informed populace, a populace that sort of rejects ignorance and is people who are like Mike, who are looking to be informed by as many things, both current events, be it how the universe works. An appetite for learning is super, super important. And while it's okay to be ignorant, to be ignorant on something, it's not something that should be celebrated. And for that reason, I have to say that ignorance is bad.
Oh, I'm ignorant of where the sound effect is for that.
You had one job, Bo. One job.
I know. Well, man, Mike has another job, and that's to tell people.
Yeah. Listeners, I don't know. I feel kind of broken about this topic for some reason. But please tell us what we're ignorant of. There's lots to tell there. We'd like to hear from you. You can get in touch with us. Go to our website, goodbadbull.com, and there you can find all the ways to reach us, including email, goodbadbull@gmail.com. You can send us a tweet on the Twitter @goodbadbull, or you could like us on Facebook and engage with us there if you like. And so please subscribe to the show if you haven't already, Google Play or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And we also have a Patreon account if you want to support the show. And we want to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. We do appreciate your support. I think it's patreon.com/goodbadbull.
By the way, we have like some long tenured patrons now too. These are not fly-by-night supporters. These are elder statesmen of the good, bad, or bullshit courts. I just thought I'd throw that in there, Mike.
It's and it is much appreciated. But like this, when I say I'm like I feel sad about this topic because Crofton, at the very end of yours you said, which is really rightly so, like about the whole you shouldn't shame someone for being ignorant either, and some people are just not everyone has the same capacity to learn. And that shouldn't be, we can't. Some people are just not intelligent. You can't. What do you do with those people? They can't be like, oh, they're the pariahs of society. It's okay. It's okay to not know stuff as well. It's just when it creeps in, it's like how you find that balance.
I think the frustrating thing is when you see someone has a pattern of that willful ignorance, not just on one thing, but that their personality, their psychological makeup is based around that. And I'm speaking pretty candidly about Sean Spicer and Trump and just that whole machine. Ugh. It just looks like they hear your words, but they don't acknowledge them in reality.
Well, and it's funny. There's all this relation to Hitler and stuff and the rise of stuff. And I was thinking in this, with Trump and it's Hitler's on the rise. It's parallels and whatever.
Listen, Trump can't hold a candle to Hitler. Okay.
But yeah. Fair enough, but I also because I had did some traveling in Cambodia, and there was this guy named Pol Pot who was a dictator there, like 2 million people killed. This was in like 1970s, and his rise was also one of like hugely anti-intellectual. Like he basically emptied out the cities, said everyone go back to